Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I understand that there's a couple dozen people on there already, and there's some more joining us. We know it's been a busy day at work in classrooms around British Columbia, and we're happy to be able to do this webinar today. It'll be archived as well, so if you have to duck out and not catch the end of it, feel free to look at it afterwards. We're going to be making this a two-way conversation, so it's not just going to be lots of information. We're going to give you some information up front, but the main purpose of this is to be able to answer some questions and to get some info from the field as well, so that we can continue our advocacy and make sure that we're bringing direct information from teachers across British Columbia to our meetings with MLAs, to staff at the Ministry of Education, and so thank you for taking the time to do this. Before I proceed, I'll just introduce myself first. My name is Glenn Hansman. I'm a Vancouver teacher, and I am the president of the BCTF as of July this year. And to my right is Terry Maureen, the first vice president of the BCTF. She's a teacher from Quesnel. And then down at the end of the table is Clint Johnston, a Chilliwack teacher, and he's the new second vice president of the BCTF. And so we're here today and are happy you are as well. We recognize definitely that this is a really challenging and sometimes really difficult time in BC schools right now. We just had our zone meetings around the province, and zone meetings are gatherings of a lot of people from our local executives and lots of people leading the various networks that we have through the Federation. And we want to thank all the people that volunteered their time this weekend, as well as all the individuals that put together some of the discussion materials and who facilitated a lot of the sessions and quite a bit of the conversation last weekend in zones around the province was what's going on in classrooms with the changes in curriculum, with changes in assessment, with changes in all sorts of education policy, including reporting, and that's what we're going to be concentrating on today. We recognize fully that it's a lot of changes happening all at once, and one of the biggest frustrations that we have had, and Jim Eicher as president last year too, was pushing the Minister of Education to sign off on a lot of the documents that only got released over the summer. We work very closely with the staff at the Ministry of Education, and we know that behind the scenes there are quite a bit of conversations that are ongoing, and there's a recognition to a certain degree about the practical realities of our members in schools, but we were quite frustrated and irritated, I think it would be fair to say, that a lot of the announcements that we were suggesting should have been out last November, last December, and at the very least in the spring of 2016, didn't come out until over the summer. And so we're talking about ministerial orders around reporting, the guidelines about what subjects had to be commented on report cards, the ministerial order that guided a whole range of things related to the graduation program and the curriculum itself. And that is really unfortunate because, of course, members around the province were spending a lot of time last spring after the additional non-instructional day and then on their own time figuring out what are they going to be doing in their classrooms in the year coming up with all the changes in curriculum. And of course, all of us know that when somebody's planning what they're going to be doing pedagogically or what sort of choices they're going to be making around topics to pursue with their students, they're thinking ahead about what they're going to be putting down on a report card and what they're going to be reporting to parents. And not having that information in advance made for a lot of additional work for people this fall that could have been completely avoided. So we're continuing to impress upon the minister and the decision makers of the Ministry of Education that they have to be more timely. And we've also been advocating for the pushback to some of the timelines that are currently in place, and Terry and Clint are going to be talking to you a little bit about that, particularly when it comes to the applied design skills and technology curriculum and reporting on careers as well. We're hoping this afternoon to provide some updates on the knowns in the reporting changes. There's still a lot of unknowns, as you're probably aware. We have, throughout this entire process, and not just on reporting, but everything related to the curriculum change, been advocating to our locals that any and all district level committees that may exist, either in your collective agreement or through other structures in the school district, that we're activating all those, that we're bringing concerns from members, schools, classrooms, to the local and then to those district level tables, so that management in school districts has to tangibly produce a realistic support plan and implementation plan to support the work that we do as teachers in our classrooms. We're hoping that's happening everywhere, and at the same time, we've been really trying to emphasize with members in schools that they too should be having regular school-based union meetings, utilizing their staff committee, if they have that in their collective agreement, to bring forward recommendations to the school-based principal, to have discussions about what resources should be in place, what would be a meaningful timeline and a way of consulting with parents, what do teachers actually need to do our jobs throughout this entire process, what can we put aside for now and perhaps focus on in the short term, knowing that there's dozens and dozens of changes happening all at once. And so we'll continue to suggest that, and it's very useful for us, again, too, because if those conversations are happening at the school and the conversations are happening at the district level, then we're able to bring that information and keep advocating, as we do at the provincial level, for more supports for our members, more access to in-service, and more realistic timelines. This week, or possibly next week, the Ministry of Education will be releasing a Q&A on the reporting topic. And hopefully it'll bring a bit more clarity to much of the ambiguity that's been out there about what the province's intentions are, and hopefully will help mitigate some school districts going a bit overboard in terms of what they're proposing. Terry's going to walk you through the different schedules, the options that are available to school districts. In a nutshell, staying with the status quo, what we've always been doing, or trying a different approach. But we want to make sure that if a school district does take a different approach, that it doesn't become an onerous make-work project for our members. If we're going to be trying out different forms of reporting to parents, it can't become just another thing that teachers are having to do in an already overcrowded workday. And if something new is going to be added, then something else has to be taken away. And in fact, there shouldn't be anything new, or quantitatively shouldn't be anything new. But we're really concerned about the law of the language that the minister has been using in press releases, as well as some of the drafts that we've been seeing float out there that refer to ongoing reporting. It's been creeping into a bunch of communiques, and that's a word that worries us for a number of reasons, in that primarily because it could set up unrealistic expectations from families about the frequency of reporting, and unrealistic workload expectations being placed on teachers. It's important, for sure, to have ongoing and meaningful conversations with families. But ongoing communication doesn't necessarily mean that it's meaningful, and doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to translate into actually talking about how a child is progressing. And so we have to make sure that we're not setting up a situation that's counterproductive, and avoid a situation that isn't just creating yet another make-work project for teachers. So I'm going to pause here and hand it off to my colleagues. I'll just say one more piece about the consultation that's underway in many school districts right now. Districts are supposed to be consulting with parents about what they'd like to see in terms of reporting, but we have to remember that it's teachers in our classrooms that make the best choices about how that should be done. And we're going to be insistent on that. And we should be insistent at both the school and the school district level that teachers are also involved in those conversations. But Terry and Clint are going to be saying a bit more about that. And we have to remember too that the order that is out this year is just an interim one. You've probably heard that. Whether it's interim for just 12 months this school year or for successive school years remains to be seen. But we'll be vigilant to make sure that members aren't put upon to do even more in an under-resourced system. And hopefully you'll be able to do that at the district level as well. So I'll hand it over to Terry.
Okay, so the new reporting order contains two schedules. Schedule 1 is pretty much the status quo with 5 required reporting times, 3 formal, 2 informal as in the past. However, there are a few notable differences. One is that the new applied design skills and technologies and career education courses need to be reported on as well. For K-5, that means reported on at the end of the school year in the summative report, in the final summative report. And also a student self-assessment on core competencies is also required in the new reporting order. So that's a little bit of a difference. For grades 6 and 7 in the actually 6 to 9 in the reporting order, the expectation is that applied design skills and technologies, and career education will be reported on with a letter grade. Now, we have had some indications from the ministry that there'll be some flexibility around whether letter grades are required, especially for the first reporting period, because it is a new curriculum. It was out late, both of them. And so teachers haven't had much of a chance to take a look at them, let alone get the resources necessary to teach the modules contained, especially in the applied design skills and technology curriculum. So that is for Schedule 1, even though we're referring to it as status quo, there are some differences that are important to note. In Schedule 2, allows the districts a great deal of flexibility. Contained within the schedule, it talks about prior to the first report of the school year, the board must provide a ministry with a copy of the reporting policy and give evidence around public consultations. We've had a conversation with the ministry, and they've decided to provide a lot of flexibility for that, because what they're realizing is it's a very tight timeline for districts to actually produce a reporting policy before the first reporting period. So they've said that they will provide districts some flexibility around that and allow districts to engage in Schedule 2, even if they haven't submitted a reporting policy, as long as they contact the ministry. When we were talking to the ministry last week, they indicated that 12 school districts had contacted them. And they said that they would expect all the districts that were planning to do something different to contact them, but we're not sure whether that has happened or not, and neither are they. We're also noticing that school districts that were already experimenting with alternate reporting seem to be carrying through and continuing that. So there's some concerns about Schedule 2 for sure. Schedule 2 sets out that there needs to be a minimum of reporting, as with Schedule 1, status quo. That can possibly or not include letter grades. But a troublesome part of Schedule 2 is that it states that letter grades will be provided upon request. So that can set up some difficult dynamics for teachers in classrooms that are experimenting without letter grades to have to provide them anyway with if the parent requests could be somewhat difficult. So in terms of the public consultation, so in order for a district to engage in Schedule 2, there is to be public consultation, and it is incumbent upon them to do it. There's nothing in the order that talks about teacher consultation, and of course we would fully expect teachers to be in on those conversations, and which is part of the reason why we're hoping that district committees are being set up and school-based committees as well, so those conversations can take place. They are critical, and in fact those conversations are critical when it comes to curriculum change and reporting, whether a district is going to Schedule 1 or Schedule 2, because both schedules are clearly have some significant differences. Even though the first one, as I said, is pretty much status quo, there are some big differences that teachers and school districts are really going to need to grapple with.
Thanks, Terry. So one of those differences that's common to both of them is the core competencies. And the thing about the core competencies is they're embedded into the curriculum. So there's no need for the teachers to ever actually comment on them themselves at any time. But the students will be self-assessing on these core competencies once at the end of the year. Probably the best way to think of it, if you've had a chance to do this before, is in terms of the social responsibility reporting that's done. But the frustration, as mentioned by Glenn and Terry, both of them, is that the delay in a lot of people knowing what that reporting is going to look like, even for the student, creates a great deal of difficulty, because you'd want to be supporting the student throughout the year to make sure that they're able to do some accurate reporting at the end of the year on their own self-assessment. In terms of that, it's another area where you'll sense a theme here. We're hoping that you have your whatever contractual district committees you have sitting down, and one of the things that you'll be doing at those is to figure out with the employer what they expect this self-assessment to look like, what you think it should look like, and that's if it's needed. I mean, in some districts, maybe they'll give you some flexibility, which would be great. But if not, those district committees need to be struck and be part of the process. There will, as far as core competencies go, there will be a meeting of the provincial classroom assessment team, and they're going to get together and work on some templates. But we'd stress that if they come up with templates, these templates will be optional. There are, of course, some locals where their local language allows the employer to tell them what they must use, but it's good to talk to your local and find out what your status is, how much autonomy language you have in your contract, whether you'll be using those or whether you'll have some flexibility. In terms of workload and the frequency of reporting, Glenn mentioned a word that is very worrisome to us. It's the ongoing. Likewise, frequent and ongoing sets up a difficult picture for most of us. So this is another thing that should be at those district committees, and it should be an upfront discussion. Trying to discuss something that's already been implemented in terms of workload can be very difficult. So the discussion should be upfront and at the district level about what the employer's expectations are, what they think it'll look like, so that you can look at those very closely to see if any workload issues are going to arise from those. Because we're pretty clearly of the position, as Glenn said, that whatever workload is part of reporting now, your workload shouldn't significantly change just because the reporting method is changing. And those should be upfront conversations again. So the thing to remember in those conversations as well probably is that the tool often shapes the task, and some of the tools might sound fantastic and might look really interesting in terms of ways to report, but it's good to keep in the forefront of your mind what that will look like for your workload, or if you're at the district level for your members' workloads, because that is the key thing. Some of them look fantastic, but they may involve a lot more work, a lot more time. And one of those ways that might happen is the access. If you get into a lot of the digital reporting, portfolios and that, this is where you need to be very careful that you don't set up a situation of access for students and teachers to your members where the demands put upon them are almost unlimited, where they're available all the time, where there's feedback expected all the time. So it's really important to look at the tool that's being suggested and remember in terms of workload what effect that will have. And even in areas, in locals that don't have fantastic autonomy language, there has been some success with locals getting together and simply advocating. If you have a very united voice in your local about a tool not being appropriate, not being the best one, often that can actually be effective in asserting your autonomy as a group. And if you get into reporting and you're starting to do it and you're realizing that there are some issues with the system you've come up with, remember that even though your local NID days, your non-instructional days around the curriculum this year, even though they're for the curriculum, reporting is part of the curriculum. I mean, it's virtually impossible to separate those two things. So that's a valid place to raise your concerns about the curriculum as it relates to reporting. And you'll have a good audience there. Your district will be there. There'll be people there that'll hear your voice. So we'd urge you to use that venue. And in terms of technology, I mentioned it already, that the first thing to think about with technology is it realistic? If there's a tool proposed, you got to think, is this realistic in our particular situation where we are in the province? Because there's a lot of areas in the province, and we tend to think always the geographically far ones from the big centers, but actually that's not always the case. But there's lots of areas where they're just desperately under-resourced, and that's in terms of infrastructure. A lot of the fantastic quick feedback and digital stuff requires quite a bit of bandwidth that lots of districts and locals won't have in place. In terms of software and hardware, if you're being asked to be constantly giving feedback based on pictures or videos or digitally, you need to ask, where's the hardware that I'm going to do this with? What software platform am I using? Am I expected to use my own device for that? Because as soon as that's an expectation, or even a student's device, then you have some privacy issues. There are a lot of very legitimate concerns around many of these technology products that they're suggesting be used for reporting. So really keep that foremost in your mind. And also, if new and unfamiliar technology is being introduced and expected to be used for reporting, we would expect that there would be adequate in-service. As Glenn and Terry have both alluded to, there is more than enough on teachers' plates this year that asking you to go home and learn how to use a new reporting system all on your own is completely unreasonable. So we'd expect there to be enough in-service to make sure that we're using it properly and effectively. I would just mention the last thing I'd say about the technology is that it has to be watched very carefully. Many of us like technology. I don't mind using it, but you have to keep front of your mind all the time. What workload issues is this going to raise for my teachers?
And before we go to questions, we're just going to show you a screenshot of our BCTF webpage. And on the top right-hand corner, you'll see a tab there that's called Issues in Education. And if you click on that tab, there's a whole bunch of stuff under there that's related to what we've just said right now. But there's a few other pages related to curriculum change. There's the framework that locals and members were using on the additional instructional days next year. And there's some updated pieces in there too around the reporting in particular. And as additional pieces get added to the ministry website, we'll of course be apprising members of that as well. So without further ado, we'd like to be able to go to some of the questions that folks are proposing online, and we'll see if we could get to as many of them as possible.
So what do I do if I am feeling pressure to use an e-portfolio reporting tool?
And is she mic'd as well?
No.
Okay, so the question was, what should I do if I am being pressured to use a e-portfolio?
Okay, so what we're recommending that you do is certainly contact your staff rep, and hopefully you have a committee in place at your school level, so that can be a conversation at the school level to start with. What we don't want to have happen is for teachers to feel pressure to use any particular reporting system, particularly the e-portfolio, because there are so many workload and issues that can occur with it. As Clint mentioned, we think that the workload issues and all those sorts of things should be talked about up front so that those problems don't arise as people work through them. But we have professional autonomy over how we report and what we, how we assess students. So no one should be feeling pressure to use, in particular, the e-portfolio, any kind of e-portfolio program, because that can set up a lot of issues. Certainly, we also would expect that teachers, or hope that teachers will contact their local presidents. Contacting the local office to alert locals of these issues is really critical. We know that there are situations in schools right now where teachers are feeling pressure. We know that they are contacting the locals, and we're hearing from them as well. Glenn also mentioned that we had some conversations at zone meetings. We're aware that this is happening, and it really needs to be nipped in the bud. So we need to really be vigilant around looking after each other. So teachers on staffs are going to have to be making sure that that pressure isn't applied at the school level, and if it is, that information needs to go to the local level. And ultimately, we also are hoping that we get that feedback as to what's happening at schools as well. So we do have a curriculum feedback email that we'll show you at the end of this presentation, so that you can let us know also what is happening.
So there's two questions from Daniel, and everyone online can see them, but I'll
Okay.
read them out to you. So first, in terms of workload, for many grade 6 and 7 teachers, the template is not the main issue. The main issue with the new reporting expectations is that there is a brand new subject, ADST, that requires a letter grade and a comment every term. Please address this.
Yeah. So the question, it's posted online for those of you who are able to see the questions online. It's from Daniel, and he is talking about the applied design skills and technology, and presumably the career one as well, where in the reporting guidelines it talks about those having to be commented on every term. And Terry mentioned this, alluded to this earlier, in that the Q&A that is probably coming out from the ministry sometime in the next week, they've indicated to us that those requirements will sort of be put on pause for the first term anyway, and possibly the second one, because it's recognized that those are completely brand new curriculum areas for some teachers, depending on their grades, unless some schools have an endless supply of popsicle sticks and googly eyes. They might not have any materials with which to actually carry out those curricular competencies right now in the first couple months of schools, until some actual resources have been purchased and school staffs have had time to work around. So that's good. And the reason why they've delayed things a little bit is because we've been pushing all along on this. Likewise with the career, the health and career education already existed from K until grade 9. And the career stuff is being separated out while the health related things are being put over with physical and health education, but career will be its own standalone thing. And the frequency which someone will have to come up with a letter grade is, according to the order anyway, will be each term eventually down the road. But again, that's the message that we're getting, and hopefully will be confirmed to this Q&A next week or later on this week, will be that won't be a requirement for this first term, and we've asked that be the case for the second term as well.
Okay, thank you. Daniel just wanted to clarify that the questions come from the BTA executive. They're watching it live at their executive meeting. And so here's the second part of that question. For grade 6, 7 ADST, there was no warning that this was coming, so not enough training and materials are ready to be able to teach it all in 3 terms. Thanks for addressing this too in terms of workload.
Yeah. So the question, I'm just repeating these back because we don't have a microphone over there. The entire Burnaby Teachers Association executive is watching this, which is great. So hello. But also they pointed out correctly that the Applied Design Skills and Technology curriculum from K to 9 wasn't available last winter and spring when most of our locals would have been having their additional non-instructional days. And so that will be completely new for intermediate teachers. And I guess some of it is down in the primary level as well, of course. But the bulk of it is in the intermediate in terms of the new stuff. And so there hasn't even been the time for conversations at the school level, let alone the district level, about who's going to be teaching it, what are we going to teach, and what do we have on hand with which to teach it. And so those are definitely one of the big ones that we're recommending to our locals to take to those district committees and say, look, school district, employer, here's a change that's occurred. How are you going to provide us with the time and the resources to support us in implementing it? We're not against this curriculum coming in, but there has to be a realistic timeline and support for it. And so we're continuing to push on that front, as we are with the health-related stuff too, because there's quite a bit of new things in there for a lot of teachers who weren't previously teaching those subject areas. And it would be helpful if that was happening at those district committees too, and hopefully that will alleviate some pressure on members at the school district, at the school level, if some school districts go, yeah, we get it, this is too much too soon, and we haven't given you what you need yet to teach this.
So the next question is, how will core competencies be assessed?
Do you want to take that one? And repeat
Sure.
the question.
I'll mention that. So the question was, how are the core competencies going to be addressed? So as I mentioned off the top, this is one of the gray areas as well, which is that we know that the students will be self-assessing on these, but the actual framework of what that looks like hasn't been determined yet. So that's why we emphasized again that this is another one of those areas where we have some clarity. Students self-assess. Teachers don't need to be doing that. Happens at the end of the year. But in terms of exactly what that looks like, it needs to be ironed out at the local level, at the district level, to figure out exactly what that's going to look like for you. And we would urge you to be using those committees quickly, because one of the urgencies we get from members is it's great to say that the assessment doesn't happen till the end of the year, but I need to know how to help my students get to the point where they can do an accurate self-assessment. So again, that's something that should be coming from those local committees. But as we've said before, if you are approaching it locally and if there's any issues coming up from that, we would love to know about them in addition to your local, so that we're staying the most well-informed we can, and we can raise them here as well as you at the local level.
Yeah. One thing I might add to that as well, we've already put it to the Ministry of Education that we're not sure how that self-assessment would ever occur at the secondary level, because with one teacher responsible for upwards of 200, even more students, each student having multiple teachers that they're working with, who's keeping track of it. What would that self-assessment even look like with a grade 11, grade 12 student? There were some exemplars on the ministry website last year, but it was unclear to those of us looking at some of those how those really illustrated the core competencies being attained. And so at the elementary level, I'm assuming and know that some members will be approaching this much like the social responsibility performance standards. And it's good that there will be some templates or rubrics or different tools being developed as examples. We also want to make sure that those don't become mandatory for individual teachers as well, because many of you will have your own ideas about what that will look like in a grade 3 class or what that will look like in a special education situation.
So this question is from Deborah. As always, the question is about funding. Do you think there will be additional funds provided to buy the resources needed for the ADST? Our elementary schools do not have any of the resources required to teach some of these areas.
Yeah, so this question is about the ADST curriculum and the resourcing around it, and in particular for grade 6 and 7, where this is a new curriculum. It came out late, where there's 10 modules, 10 technology modules that have been downloaded to grade 6, and the concern is what resources will I have to teach them? And our concern, of course, is that teachers looking at those 10 modules should have the opportunity to teach. There 3 are required, I should say, to be taught in grade 6 and 7. And so as a grade 7 teacher, I should be able to look at all 10 modules and choose 3 that I think best suit my students, and perhaps based on their interest levels, as opposed to the 10 that, or as opposed to 3 that I have the materials for. That's not the way the decisions should be made. We're continuing to really push on the resource issue. Currently, the district has, the ministry, I should say, has committed $6 million, 2 for teaching coding, 2 for resources around coding, and 2 for the rest of the curriculum. This is not enough. This is very meager. We also know that school districts have money for professional development as well. So that those conversations need to happen at the local level for access to those local monies that are put forward in budgets around professional development. And we know they're often used in ways that maybe don't necessarily support teachers in the classroom, and they absolutely need to do that. So it's critical that we continue to push both at the local and provincial level around resourcing the curriculum. And this is part of the reason also why we push back on the reporting around ADST especially, because we know that teachers don't have the resources, particularly in the K-7 setting. In the middle school setting, perhaps those resources are available and have been for a while, but in K-7 settings in particular, we know that that's a big problem for teachers right now.
Are there any changes to reporting for students with special needs?
So the question is, are there any changes in reporting for students with special needs?
Not as yet. The students with special needs fall under the same report order as any other student. To date, there are no changes to any of the IEP requirements. There is going to be a call out in the next week or so looking for some BCTF members to sit on a provincial committee, much like we put a call out for the various curriculum committees, to look at the ministry's special education categories, and with a view to aligning them with the new DSM-5, the American Psychological Association, which our ministry bases its categories on, has changed its criteria, and so we'll be seeking some teacher psychologists, members who are speech-language paths, resource teachers, and some classroom teachers to look at the criteria. That is the only piece that's changed otherwise, or it's the only piece that will be changing related to students with special needs that we are concretely aware of at this point. But all the other stuff around, getting an I or an asterisk or the other sort of status quo reporting around grades, that hasn't changed.
Do teachers have to report on all areas of learning?
Do you want to take that?
Yes, you do. The teachers do have to report on all areas of learning because the curriculum covers all those areas of learning. So, well, I guess I could go on, but the short answer is yes, you do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And look at the report order and
Yep.
the policy.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So the report order gives a specific breakdown for what you have to comment for K-3, and then goes to grade 4 and 5, and so on. The 10, 11, 12 stuff is still to come. It's whatever the process would have been last year.
The ministry has just sent an email saying the guidelines document is ready and it'll be posted on the curriculum page.
The question answered.
Great. So the question we're getting, apparently the ministry's Q&A guidelines around reporting is ready and formatted and will be on their curriculum webpage
Shortly.
shortly. Let's say tomorrow.
Does every school in a school district have to follow the same option for reporting?
So the question is, does every school in a school district have to follow the same option for reporting? And the answer is no, they don't. And so we don't know of any school districts, although there may be some out there, that are using Schedule 2 for every school in the entire district. And certainly 10 to 12, hasn't changed, so it wouldn't be covered in this anyway. What we're more seeing are selected schools that have previously been experimenting, especially with e-portfolio reporting systems like FreshGrade, and that seems to be continuing. There are other school districts where it seems like there are selected schools or selected grades perhaps where different reporting is happening. But what it appears right now is the norm seems to be that individual schools seem to be using alternate reporting as per the ministry order. And again, what we think is really important here is that not every teacher of the school needs to be making their own decisions around how they're reporting, and they shouldn't feel pressure to report in a particular way because their colleagues are.
Do all students in grades 4 to 9 receive letter grades?
So the question is, do all students in grades 4 to 9 receive letter grades? And I guess that the answer is it depends on which schedule they're following. So Schedule 2, the option is not to have letter grades. And Schedule 1 is more the traditional letter grade format. And so that's been a big conversation in school districts in the last few years around the efficacy of not using letter grades. Now, the only complicating factor in all this is that even in a school where teachers aren't providing letter grades, parents can still request them and receive them. And so we've been communicating with the ministry about the problem around this, and it sets up a number of difficulties for teachers. So it really depends on what schedule the school district is following in terms of whether letter grades are reported or not.
Do teachers need to report on each of the 4 strands in the arts education curriculum?
Yes.
The question is, do teachers have to report on each of the 4 strands in the arts education curriculum? The answer to the question is teachers have to provide, if the school district or the school is using the sort of the previous format of letters, letter grades and comments, they have to report on arts education. And so your role is to teach the curricular competencies throughout that document. And so there isn't sort of the approach that was taken with the previous report cards where each of the strands were broken out.
Yeah.
It's a global grade and comment that you were doing. What your approach would be if your school district or school was using one of the alternate ones, that remains to be seen. It'll depend on what your school district or your school adopts and what the conversations are.
So regarding reporting on physical and health education, do teachers use written comments, performance scales, letter grades, a combination? What format does that take?
So the question is around physical and health education and how that can be reported. Can it be reported with letter grades? Can it be reported with written comments? And again, this is a relatively new, this is a new curriculum in that health education has been included into physical education. And so this sets up some significant differences from before. And so again, it depends on whether written comments are used or letter grades, depends on the schedule that the school district has chosen to operate with. If it's the traditional Schedule 1, letter grades would be expected for physical and health education as they were for physical education in the past. Again, Schedule 2 allows some flexibility. But all of these are really important conversations to have at the local level, because as we talked about flexibility being given for applied design skills and technology, again, we are aware that teachers don't necessarily have the resources available to adequately teach the health education as it's been newly constituted. So that's another area that needs to be under conversation, and there needs to be, again, we are continuing the provincial pushback. That needs to be a local conversation as well.
And the last question at this point is, are the permanent student records continue to be kept?
The question is, are the permanent student records continue to be kept? And the answer is yes. This reporting order doesn't change any of that. Might there be changes to permanent records and other things related to it? It could be, but that's not one of the things on the horizon right now that's being worked on. But last year there were the changes to evergreen certificates, tightening up the order that pertained to evergreen certificates, and this was something that the BCTF and the First Nations Education Steering Committee and a few other groups were advocating for it to happen, because evergreens only were supposed to be given to students with a special education designation. However, in a handful of school districts, there were many students that were being given evergreens that did not have a special ed certificate, and a disproportionate number of those students were Aboriginal. And so this was extremely problematic, but fortunately that was tightened up by the Minister of Education back in early 2016. And so this will be the first full school year where that is in place.
So that concludes our
Okay.
questions.
Well, thank you very much for being here. As always, please feel free to email us with any of your questions, and definitely be in contact with your local. And we will continue to endeavor to have both pieces working together. And Terry's going to let you know about an email contact in order to for you to send your questions and any queries that you might have.
Yeah, so on the screen right now should be an email for you to be able to contact us with any concerns you have around reporting or curriculum implementation. Again, we encourage you also to contact your local about this, but we're also needing information about what's happening at schools in order for us to better advocate for you around reporting and curriculum implementation. So the website, or the email I should say, should be up right now, curriculum design. It is on the screen right now. So we would like you to contact us if you have any questions, concerns, or just information about what's happening at your school.
And so on behalf of the BCTF, thank you very much for tuning in, and let's keep the conversation going.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.